may be the greatest catch I've ever seen in my life.
Okay, so I know the quarterback position has seen a massive change over the past year. I mean, it used to be you literally just wait until the very end, you grab a guy that you like his week 1 matchup, then you go through and you stream the rest of the season. I mean, it was a very simple strategy for a very long time when you were playing in redraft leagues where, I mean, people had no idea what they were doing. They were taking pocket passing quarterbacks that had absolutely no rushing upside at all, and they were drafting them in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th round, and you were sitting here going, okay, that's a wasted pick. Obviously, we would rather have a running back. Obviously, we would rather have a wide receiver in that range. Well, it's a different age in the NFL now. I mean, now you do have access to those quarterbacks that have that elite rushing upside, as well as have the potential to have the passing volume where they can be league winners in fantasy football. I mean, we all remember 2019, where if you didn't have a Lamar Jackson, I mean, well, you better had Christian McCaffrey or you were not winning your league. I mean, there were only 2 players, and one of them was a quarterback to have that league winning type upside. I mean, you almost had the same thing this past season with the Josh Allen. And because of this, you're starting to see those quarterbacks that have that elite rushing, that have that elite passing combination start to go earlier in fantasy drafts. Well, I've been drafting those players in fantasy drafts, at least in our redraft mock drafts, where we're going through, and hell, if I see a Lamar Jackson fall to the 5th round, I'm getting excited. I'm starting to jump up and down. But I think if you go through and you look at the wide receivers that you're giving up in that range, where you understand, hey, I can have a Mike Evans here, I can have an Amari Cooper, what we should probably be doing, especially when you look back at those draft boards afterwards and you see that these quarterbacks are going after round 15 and you're saying there is elite upside here. There is an upside to have a Lamar Jackson from 2019, because we remember Lamar Jackson in 2019. Josh Allen in 2020. They were not being drafted as top-end quarterbacks. They were being drafted as quarterbacks at the very end of drafts that had that upside. So now let's go through. Let's try to identify the same thing here. And I'll say just some more strategy regarding the quarterback position. I mean, you are not looking to ever draft a quarterback in a single quarterback redraft league that does not have access to having that elite rushing upside or that elite passing ceiling. I mean, quarterbacks like Baker Mayfield, quarterbacks like Matt Ryan, they literally have no value for me in fantasy this year, because those are streaming options. I would rather go through in a 1 quarterback redraft league and just stream the position versus draft Baker Mayfield as the 18th quarterback off the board. I mean, what are you doing there? I mean, you look at his historical production, you look at what you've seen over the past few years with the NFL trending towards those rushing QBs, and you understand that that pick makes no sense. So if you're going to pass up on a Dak Prescott, a Lamar Jackson, a Justin Herbert, a quarterback that's going in round 5 and 6 in this year's draft, I mean, if we were taking these guys at the end, I want to be shooting as high as we can, as much upside as we can. And that's why we're going to be going through this list right here. But of course, before we get to the players' names, go down there, drop a like, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel. It helps us out a ton. And let's dive into it with our first quarterback in Justin Fields. Okay, so I'm going to be completely honest here. Y'all know, if you've been watching the Dynasty Football channel for a while now, I mean, Justin Fields is a player in rookie drafts when in Superflex leagues, he was only going behind Trevor Lawrence and he was the 102 in those rookie drafts. I was on record saying Justin Fields was a quarterback that I hated at that price. I mean, I prefer Trey Lance in a format like that easily, but that's not what we're talking here. What we're talking about is a redraft league where you're drafting 1 quarterback and you are just chasing ceiling. And right now, Justin Fields is being drafted behind multiple quarterbacks that cannot even dream, cannot even think about, or they would just understand that, I mean, it's not in the range of outcomes of their ceiling being anything close to what Justin Fields possesses. I mean, quarterbacks going ahead of Justin Fields are Baker Mayfield, Carson Wentz, and Kirk Cousins. I don't understand this. Baker Mayfield, Carson Wentz, and Kirk Cousins in a 1 quarterback redraft format. None of them have any rushing upside in the slightest. Those are players that are streaming options. Those are players that you play based on the matchups. And here, Justin Fields has the potential to be a weekly starter for you. Now, going back to what we were saying about in a Dynasty Superflex League, why I want Trey Lance over Justin Fields, why I think Justin Fields is in that same tier of a Zach Wilson, is you look historically, I mean, you understand that quarterbacks that get drafted in the top 3 overall, they are guaranteed at the very minimum to start all 4 years in their NFL career. I mean, this is something we've talked about a ton. You look at the last 10 quarterbacks drafted in the top 3. You have Joe Burrow, Kyler Murray, Baker Mayfield, Sam Darnold, Trubisky, Goff, Wentz, Winston, Mariota, and Blake Bortles. And you realize, hell, I mean, even the worst quarterbacks in this list, even Blake Bortles, Marcus Mariota, Mitchell Trubisky, Jared Goff, doesn't matter who it is, they're getting at the very minimum 4 years to start, and in a Superflex Dynasty League, that is extremely valuable. But in a one quarterback redraft league, it doesn't matter at all. In a one quarterback redraft league, I mean, who cares what the downside of Justin Fields is? Now, I'll say just real quick, if we were bringing up Dynasty Superflex, let me justify not having Justin Fields in the same tier as Trey Lance, because you go through and you look at quarterbacks drafted outside, just say the top 9 picks. So quarterbacks 10 through 32 in the first round. The past 10, you've had Jordan Love, Haskins, Rosen, Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes, DeShaun Watson, Paxton Lynch, Johnny Manziel, Teddy Bridgewater, and Brandon Weeden. So there, you only had 3 out of 10 of those guys get 4 years to start in the NFL. So it's a completely different situation if you're looking at floor and ceiling combinations. I mean, the floor with those quarterbacks drafted at the very top, given the team investment, they're going to have a significantly longer leash to be starting quarterbacks in the NFL. So that kind of shows you where the floor is if worst case scenario happens with these quarterbacks. So that's specifically for those Dynasty Superflex leagues, because in a one quarterback league, the floor doesn't matter at all. And we are focusing on ceiling here. And you heard the list that we briefly went over that Justin Fields belongs in. And I mean, here you have 3 quarterbacks in Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, DeShaun Watson, that all came in and completely smashed. You see upside available here. And what did all of those quarterbacks have in common? All of those quarterbacks had some sort of rushing potential. Now, I know Mahomes isn't exactly like a Watson or a Lamar, but he's still right up there with what he can do on his legs in need be in situations that are neck and neck. I mean, just think of the Tennessee Titans playoff game a few years back. But here, Justin Fields stepping into a situation where he has a top 10 wide receiver already. I mean, he has a field-stretching wide receiver in Darnell Mooney. He has Cole Kmet, a tight end that not necessarily too excited about. So this isn't a great situation. I'll say you love having Allen Robinson there. Obviously, Allen Robinson, one of the best wide receivers in the NFL. But if we were going best case scenario, and you look at Justin Fields, he ran a 4.46 40-yard dash. He averaged 48 rushing yards a game. He had 5 total rushing touchdowns in only 8 games his final year. I mean, this is fantastic. A 70% completion percentage, 262 passing yards, 2.75 passing touchdowns a game. I mean, all of these stats scream a quarterback that has an elite ceiling. And we have never argued that Justin Fields does not possess that league-winning type potential. And the fact that in a format, in a one quarterback redraft league where you don't care about the floor and all that matters is ceiling, Justin Fields going behind Baker Mayfield, Carson Wentz, Kirk Cousins, it makes no sense at all. I mean, I would never even think about taking any of those quarterbacks over Justin Fields. I mean, a massive, massive value here. Now, the next guy we can talk about is going to be a quick, brief mention. There is no better player, in my opinion, if you were drafting a one quarterback redraft league right now, to take at the very end of your draft besides DeShaun Watson. Now, I understand everybody's going to have their own opinion on what you're going to be expecting with DeShaun Watson this upcoming season, how many games that he is going to play. But what we can say with DeShaun Watson is he is being drafted behind Ben Roethlisberger and Ryan Fitzmagic right now. Now, he's being drafted as the quarterback 24. So this is a situation where it's going to be extremely nice with DeShaun Watson. If you were drafting in a redraft league right now, or possibly in a couple weeks, now it's going to be completely different in best ball, I will admit that, but we're talking about a league where you have a waiver wire right now. I mean, how does it hurt you at all with one of your last picks in your draft? In just say round 15, you go through and you draft DeShaun Watson. And what's going to be extremely nice is by the time we get to week 1, you're going to know what's happening with DeShaun Watson. You're going to know if this is a quarterback suspended 4 games, suspended 8 games, suspended a season, or not suspended at all. And then all of a sudden, you can then make the decision, hey, this is a quarterback that we are just going to be cutting off our roster. I mean, if he's suspended 12 games, there's no real reason to just hold him on the back half of the bench. We need that spot to be able to churn through the waiver wire to make sure we are picking up those running backs like a James Robinson, like a Myles Gaskin from last year. And in that scenario, yeah, you cut DeShaun Watson. No harm, no foul, because he was one of your last picks. And what people don't understand in fantasy drafts, if it's just a regular format, is those last picks that you have, the majority of the time, they're getting cut regardless. The majority of the time, they're never making an impact because you want those roster spots for waiver wire players. So with DeShaun Watson, this is a free upside shot at an elite quarterback in fantasy because you go through his 4-year career so far in the NFL. And in 2020, this was his worst season. He was the quarterback 6 in points per game. That's his worst year in points per game, and he really had no weapons. I mean, he had 12 games of Will Fuller. He had 14 games of Brandon Cooks. Now, I know this situation is going to be disgusting in Houston this upcoming year. Nobody's hiding away from that, but there is a chance that he gets traded. Like I said, not likely, but we are chasing all upside here, and that's all that matters. Now, in 2019, he was the quarterback 3. In 2018, he's the quarterback 4. And in 2017, the quarterback 1 in points per game. So how does it hurt you at all? If you're going to have to make sure that you are going to eventually cut a player for the waiver wire in the first few weeks, I mean, why does it hurt you to draft DeShaun Watson? You're going to have that clarity on if you're cutting him or if you're keeping him by the time we get to the season. DeShaun Watson, it's like a cheat code right now, drafting him at the end of drafts. I mean, it's essentially a free shot at just getting one of those elite quarterbacks and not costing you anything to do so. Now, let's go to quite possibly my favorite quarterback and someone that I'm going to be way overweight on. I have him in almost every single league. Doesn't matter if it's redraft, doesn't matter if it's dynasty. He's my guy, Trey Lance. Okay, so right now, Trey Lance is right in that same range. Quarterback 25. You're getting him at the very end of your drafts. And he's being drafted behind Ben Roethlisberger, Ryan Fitzmagic. And you're looking at this as a situation going, yeah, I understand. Trey Lance may not come close to leading the NFL in passing his rookie season. It may not even be in the conversation. But what do we need to remember from that 2019 season from Lamar Jackson? Rushing alone at the quarterback position can give you such an elite edge where Trey Lance, without anything in his passing game, can go through and can be easily a quarterback 1 in fantasy. Now, that is just to go, hey, what if he's as bad of a passer as Lamar Jackson? What if he's as bad at moving the ball down the field as Lamar Jackson has been for the first 2 years of his own NFL career? I mean, Trey Lance still has the elite rushing upside. I mean, he still has that Lamar Jackson upside where he averaged 70 rushing yards a game in college. He had 14 rushing touchdowns in 16 games. I mean, this is a player that is an elite rusher, and I think you can safely say that Trey Lance may even be an upgrade over Lamar Jackson with what he is doing in the passing game. And you can say that, and you can also look at the situation that we have in San Francisco, where right now, George Kittle being drafted as the tight end 2, tight end 3 in drafts. Brandon Ayuk being drafted as a low-end wide receiver 2. Deebo Samuel being drafted as a low-end wide receiver 3. So it tells us that people are projecting this 49ers passing offense to be about in the middle of the NFL. They're projecting them to be about middle of the road with what you're expecting from the ADP that we get from their top weapons in fantasy. Now you throw in the fact that, hey, if you were going to have a quarterback that is average in the NFL in passing and make him a top 5 rushing quarterback in the NFL, we have seen Cam Newton. We have seen Lamar Jackson. We have seen Kyler Murray. We have seen Jalen Hurts all have elite success with less passing marks. So all of a sudden, Trey Lance becomes someone that does have top 3 upside in fantasy if he can just be an average passer at the NFL level and he can hit that elite rushing ceiling that he does have. And I know a lot of people are going to be saying, but Mason, the reason he's being drafted as the quarterback 25 is because he's not going to start for half the year, which I will say, please check history. Check what has happened in the past, because we go through and we do a simple study on the last 10 quarterbacks that were drafted inside the top 3 picks. And these are not necessarily just quarterbacks that were traded up for. I mean, you have to keep in mind that this team gave up the 12th pick, a future first, and another future first to go out there and get Trey Lance. So they are all in on Trey Lance themselves. And now quarterbacks drafted in the top 3 the past 10 years, you have Joe Burrow starting by week 1, Kyler Murray starting by week 1, Baker Mayfield starting by week 3, Sam Darnold starting by week 2, Trubisky week 4, Jared Goff week 8, Carson Wentz week 1, Winston 1, Mariota 1, Bortles 3. So you do some simple math on this, and you go, half of these quarterbacks that were drafted in the top 3 over the past 10 were starting by week 1. 90% of them were starting by week 4. That is the number I want to point out, because you draft Trey Lance at quarterback 25. I mean, you can wait 4 weeks to start him. If this is someone that does have that elite quarterback one potential, and you're getting him with the last pick in your fantasy draft in a league where the floor doesn't matter. I mean, worst case scenario, Trey Lance comes in and he is a subpar NFL quarterback. He's only a high-end quarterback 2 in fantasy, given his rushing production and everything. Well, he was your last round pick. Who cares? Go through and stream the position. But here we are chasing upside, and it's hard to argue that anybody has more upside in fantasy when we are trying to play a fake game, scoring fake points, and rushing at the quarterback position is literally a cheat code at this point. There's a very hard argument to be made that Trey Lance does not have top 3 overall upside because it's in the range of outcomes. And that's why if I'm not drafting DeShaun Watson with my last pick in my fantasy draft, I'm taking Trey Lance. And of course, these are leagues where you have a waiver wire, you have access to go through and stream the position if worst case scenario does occur. But because you have that backup, and because we have seen historically time and time again that by streaming the position, you can piece together a mid quarterback one season just off of waivers. Well, what that tells us is that it makes so much sense to aim for the moon when you're in your last rounds. Drafting a Baker Mayfield, drafting Carson Wentz, drafting a Kirk Cousins does nothing for you in a league where you do have access to the waiver wire. In a one quarterback format where you have access to the waiver wire, not interested in those guys at all. Just go for the upside with Justin Fields, DeShaun Watson, Trey Lance. Easy game. Now, thank you, my dudes. I really hope y'all enjoyed this video. Of course, go down there, drop a like, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel. It helps us out a ton, and I'll see y'all with the video tomorrow. Thank you to everybody supporting the show. We got some new members of the flock, and Robert, Caden, Matt, Robbie, Dan, John, Ziggy, Blake, Oliver, and Devin. Thank you, my dudes.